A quick 30 seconds before we start this next episode with a good friend of mine, George, who is a family lawyer and gives us a huge insight into his own personal life and into the life of someone that practices family law. This podcast has had such an amazing level of feedback, so thank you. And to continue that, please press that subscribe button, get involved with the comments, and that will be more than enough to keep these podcasts coming your way. So anyways, let's get into the show. All right, man. Well, I guess thanks for coming.
My absolute pleasure.
The first question is an easy one, but an important one, and that is, what do you hope that this story that you're going to share with us today inspires in the men that are going to listen?
Look, what I really hope, just as this conversation progresses, is that people come away from this thinking laterally, looking internally, and being able to say, what is it within their control that they can change? I think in society today, with a lot of the things that we deal with, we look externally, there's conflict all around us, but the one thing that we fail to do is look internally and say, well, we have X, Y, Z around us, which is causing a lot of pain and suffering, but what can I do to get through this? What can I do to improve myself and the people around me and their lives? And what can I do to cause the least amount of harm around me, but whilst promoting the most amount of good? So if I think our listeners or your listeners can step away and really have that introspect, that self-reflection, it'd be a really good step moving forward for a lot of people, because as we see in society, things are getting more hectic day by day. So it is a very complex question, and hopefully we'll, as we talk more, we'll get through it a little bit, but that's what I'd like people to walk away with.
I guess when you say think laterally, has there been, a recent time where you've had to adopt that philosophy or that thought process?
Oh, for sure. So as part of my work as a family lawyer, we have to constantly detach ourselves from what clients may be going through. And we see a lot of emotional abuse, domestic violence issues, a lot of conflict between parents, regardless of gender. And one of the ways that you deal with that conflict, notwithstanding the severity of it, is you think laterally. You pause for a second to think, all right, 1 second. We know what the conflict is. We know what the harm is. We know what the damage is. But do we stop and say, how do we progress through it, knowing it exists? Because it won't go away. As I say, by thinking laterally, you just open your mind up to the different options available to you and the different things that you can rely on to address things in a more methodical way, using that lateral thinking. And not everyone has that ability or skill. It's something that we have to practice daily. And a lot of things, I think this is more applicable for men generally, is we're really bad at doing that a lot of the time. You hear it's okay not to be okay, and you hear a lot of men support groups saying, ask your mate, things like that. I think it's much more deep-seated in that, especially in the culture that we live in. I think we really have to go and get someone you can confide in, or, go to a professional if needed, and say, look, these are the things that I'm dealing with. I'm having trouble. I've got brain fog, whatever it might be. What's a way to help me get through it? And just go through different thinking processes and plans. It can make a world of difference to people.
I think, it's interesting we talk about lateral thinking. Part of that is also active listening. Just to be able to literally listen with an intention that you're trying to get something out of it, so that, you've made sure that person's been heard, and then you can make sure you give the best response to that, whatever the statement is or question is. Because quite often we're thinking and we're going around in a circle time and time again where we haven't really listened. And I guess your job as a family lawyer, a lot of what you would have to do is listen first.
The vast majority of my clients, especially those that leave reviews, that is, you've actually pinpointed one of the key aspects that I think a lot of family lawyers may either lack or maybe not appreciate, that clients need. It is a necessity. Active listening is a must, because you may hear someone say, this happened to me. What are they really saying? Active listening isn't just, okay, I've heard what this person has to say, and yeah, that sounds like abuse. It's what's their body language when they say it? What's their history? What is their conditioning? What have they gone through? is it really a matter of it was just this one example, or is that on top of 1,000 others that they're not really willing to express at this stage? And so active listening is right there in the top, probably 3 most important things when you're dealing with anyone with conflict. And again, when you tie it back to men, you got blokes sitting around having a beer and having a laugh. That active listening component or aspect may not always be present. And that's why it's important to have those support groups around you, even if you don't want to. I know I'm the first to put up my hand when I'm like that. I'll be by myself when sometimes I should be speaking to someone. Okay, and there's no shame in that. It's about learning from it and finding that person who is willing to actively listen.
It's interesting because we're pretty good at giving unsolicited advice quickly. You go to Bob from the cricket club and you go, mate, I'm having a fucking hard time with the missus, and Bob goes, oh well, hit it and quit it, or say something like that. But it could be just a good piece of advice for blokes in general, just to be able to listen and go, you know what, I'm not going to give any advice, which is, to be honest, I think what most women would really, really like. But I'm not going to give any advice today. I'm just going to listen, hear you out. And I'm going to come back in 2 weeks or a week once I've processed it and given you something in return. And that person that's spoken to them all of a sudden feels like they've been heard.
Spot on. And
I guess, now that you're in the family law side of things, how have you found it since, I guess COVID especially, that has been such a monumental shift in the way that we're, I guess, have gone about life and the changes that have happened since then. What's happened in the family law sense?
Oh, look, during COVID and the lockdown periods, the divorce rates spiked and the applications to the family court and federal circuit court spiked. Domestic violence spiked, conflict spiked. We're having new referrals coming left, right and centre. It was absolute madness, but in some ways, COVID may have just been the catalyst for it all to come forward in a more severe sense, because it was happening already before that. I go again back to broader societal issues. We constantly see this duality between right and wrong, men and women, left-wing politics and right-wing politics, and we have this sense of division as opposed to unity. When you have 2 lawyers representing 2 families, by having an approach of us versus them, you are never going to be able to help these families move forward. You are only going to increase the divide. And that's what we see when we go to the family court, or when families are at that point where they're saying, there's been so much conflict, I want a lawyer, I want that person to suffer. And that's what we really found coming out of COVID was, I think everyone was at their wits' end for whatever reasons. Obviously, financial pressures within Australia are increasing. Lockdowns did nothing to assist families being stuck in the one house together, although some people enjoyed it. But I think it really just brought things to a head, and now we're at a stage of we need some real change here, because the delays in the court system are just completely unsatisfactory, and the government's aware of that. They're doing what they can to address it, but it's people who are suffering. And so what I've really seen coming out of COVID is this us versus them mentality has almost bolstered, because again, when you turn on the TV, what do you see? Well, you saw every day COVID numbers. You saw every day how strict our laws were with respect to lockdowns. You saw every day negativity. How is it supposed to assist anyone? Especially those who are going through a separation, and especially those going under separation under the one roof, and those who have children. You got mummy and daddy trying to pretend as though things are okay when daddy's sleeping on the couch downstairs and the kids are wondering what's going on. And so whilst COVID may have been a contributing factor to stresses and why more applications were made, I don't think it was anything other than bringing matters to a head to where we are now.
With divorce rates, how does that work when it comes to, I guess, men versus women lodging these applications for divorce? Is it normally like, one party goes to a lawyer first, and then as a result of that, the other party finds out that it's divorce, or do they normally, have a mutual agreement and then they come to the lawyers together?
Yeah, that's very rare. For two people to come together and approach a lawyer, that's called collaborative law. It exists. It is a thing, but it's very rare.
Right.
We try mediations as a requirement for the court. The court doesn't just allow you to make an application. You have to take certain steps before you can make it, and one of those is, have you tried genuinely to resolve matters? Now, some people will say, yeah, that was genuine. Whether it really was or not is subject to what the court perceives. But what we usually will find is, and it's a sad state of affairs, what I'm about to say, but this is just the truth of what we see. Because of the court's underfunding, and because there's so much stress on the judiciary, which isn't a fault of theirs, they're humans as we are, what we find is when there's allegations arise, the court will tend to try and deal with them as quickly as possible within the parameters of the law, which aren't ideal for quick justice. The delays of 1 to 2, 3 years when you go into the court system.
Wow.
And so what you go is, a very common thing will be, father will go home, all of a sudden there's an intervention order he wasn't expecting, can't go into his house, can't see his children, the police assist him, grab a box of his goods and leave his house, and they go find an Airbnb or go stay with family or whatever it might be. Other side of the coin is, mum's mental, she's not doing well, dad does the same thing, gets an intervention order, mum has to leave the house. In terms of which one's more common or not, it would most likely be that male example I gave. But again, it's not a reflection of the women who are obtaining these intervention orders. Are the courts set up in a way to actually screen things properly? Because if every allegation was taken at its highest, you'd have to hand out intervention orders. But what if they weren't? All you're doing is removing parents from their children, from families, and creating further conflict due to a lack of funding.
That's insane. 3 years it can take up to.
More. But the worst case that we were the fourth set of lawyers. It was effectively a one-night stand that produced a child, and by the time maybe when the child was 1 o'clock, they started court proceedings. Not 1 o'clock, 1 years old when they started court proceedings. It finished when the child was 11.
Holy fuck.
Okay, so that's how complex family law is, and people do not realize the distress and damage it causes to families by going through that process. Yes, it's the last resort for a lot of people, but it is not a good option for anyone. If you can resolve things, you get lawyers who tell you straight up, it's not a process you want to go through, it's expensive, it's horrible. If it's cross-examination and your barrister sits there laying into your ex-partner for hours on end or days on end, you're not going to walk out of this better than you were beforehand. Try and resolve things. Use mediation. Try and see things from the other person's perspective. And that's why I opened up when you asked me that question. Thinking laterally, it's what do I really want for me? Do I want to fight this person who I had a relationship with for so long? Do I want my children to be exposed to the conflict that will inevitably arise when people go through court proceedings? Most people would say no, they don't want that. But it is what ends up happening. The question is why? And it's probably a question for another day in terms of the legal system, but looking internally, that's what people need to do, and this is my view, that's what would really help a lot of people. Find out what they can do to improve themselves, how they contributed to the conflict that may have been caused. Get that insight, and if you struggle with that, as most of us do, I only obtained it later on in life after dealing with hundreds and hundreds of families over many years now. It's insight is golden. It's worth more than anything else, because until you're aware of your own deficiencies, your own problems, it's very difficult to then do what you were saying earlier, where you can just give advice to someone else. Well, that advice could be the worst thing they need to hear. But if they have that insight into their own issues, they can hear it in a different perspective, and they say, look, this guy doesn't really understand it, that's all right, but I know I have these sort of things, and then they can go and get professional advice.
One thing that, I remember, and for those that don't know, George and I grew up pretty close, You know, well, we were 8 years old when we met, and we
probably.
5, 6, 7 years doing martial arts together.
Yep.
You know, super bubbly, wanted to play, what was it, knuckles?
Knuckles.
Yeah, between me and my brother, just walk out of the dojo with like bloody knuckles. You were like a hardcore motherfucker, man. I remember just like sparring against you and your brother, and your younger brother came through at some stage, and our mums fought as well. It was unbelievable. But over that period of time, obviously, you know, it's been a long time since we've caught up, and moving into family law, obviously what you take on from others can impact you quite a lot. How has dealing with hundreds of families affected you, and what have you done to, I guess, steel yourself from all the shit that you have to hear in your daily life?
That's something that I've been struggling with recently, because I think for years on end, I am such an advocate for people who need help. I don't care whether you're male or female or whatever you want to be. If there's an injustice and someone needs assistance, I'm just such an advocate for them, and I'll put their interests and needs beyond my own. And it's again that ability to think laterally, to detach yourself from their emotions. Of course, I have empathy, I have sympathy for a lot of these people that go through it. I have compassion like you wouldn't believe, because they need it. But at the same time, you need to draw the line between professional and friend. You need to give these people the advice they need to hear in a way that they can hear it and listen to it and take it on board as though they're not being attacked. That's a very difficult thing to do, and it takes years of experience to do that. I'm still learning, as are most of the profession. And I think more now than ever, when we're seeing a rise in depression, we're seeing a rise in mental health issues, our ability as people, forget lawyers, ability as people to acknowledge and see when someone is struggling is really what it's about, because then you can say, all right, I can see these symptoms, or I can see these behaviours. Maybe I need to tailor my behaviour to see what's actually going on beneath the surface. And so when you hear horrible things such as child abuse, and I won't go into all the other triggering topics that we deal with on a daily basis, but when you see them, your empathy kicks in because you're a human, your compassion kicks in because you don't want to see them that way, but then your integrity kicks in as a human and says, you know what, I'm going to help this person through this process. And that's the way that you detach yourself professionally from personally with these people. But if I'm to be completely honest, especially for cases that go on for a while, you become friends with these people. You get to know them, every single thing about them, because when you're in court, there's no secrets. Everything comes up, you know, and so you get to know these people and they become friends. I'm also in a, thrash punk metal band called Beyond Contempt. I've had clients at our gigs.
That's awesome.
In the mosh pit. And I've had acoustic stuff where people come and just have a quiet listen. But the point of it is, we are human at the end of the day. We are not just lawyers and clients. But it is a very difficult task when you are seeing these really horrible, horrible things happen to parents, but especially children who are innocent. It's very difficult to not feel for them on a deep level and not take that home with you. And you do take it home, and I think that dog in me and that level of advocacy and that determination, which probably was born from karate, because we learned to be disciplined. We learned to control our emotions. When you get hit, you keep a straight face. A lot of that translated into my job, I think. And I was able to push through it, not realizing that maybe I was taking on a little bit too much of my emotional cup without realizing it until this year, where I sort of have had a bit of a hiccup and had to take some time off just to refresh my mind and deal with a few health issues I have.
We'll get into the health issues in a second. I'd just love to know, from your point of view, prior to taking time off, did you have any sort of like ritual or any sort of like thing that you would do when you went home in regards to meditation? Did you write stuff in a journal? What did you do for you? What was your practice to, alleviate the stress between your ears?
Usually take after our calls from clients. But no, big one for me is acoustic guitar. which is bad because of my recent health issues, stopped me being able to play. But a big one of it was just writing music. And it's not active writing in the sense that I have a plan or a song in mind. I just pick it up and whatever my hands play, that's my expression. And your brain just sort of switches off. Your hands do their own thing. It's very much on autopilot. And I find that process and that expression really comes through in my music, which tends to be quite emotive. And I think it is an expression of what's going on within me internally. But otherwise, it's just a matter of sometimes talking over the day with people around you, doing something inane, playing a video game, watching some anime, watching some Rick and Morty, which is why I got this shirt on. Although it's actually quite philosophical, we'll get into that later. But it's those sort of things that your just daily life, go through it, don't forget about it. Don't let these things build up because they will eat away at you if you let them. You need to establish those boundaries for your own mental health because, and this is the example that we give all clients, and it's probably something I should take on board myself, but when you're on a plane and they say, if the air masks drop, don't put it on your child first, you put it on you. If you're not able to breathe, you're not going to be able to look after anyone else. And that's really was the clinch and the real point in my life where I said, you know what I've been preaching all this time, I need to take my own medicine. I need to put my own gas mask on first because all these people I'm trying to help out, what good is it if I can't help myself?
You use the term fill your cup earlier, and you want to fill your cup so that it can flow into the cups of others rather than, have a half full cup, and those are the things that a lot of people don't realize till they are burnt out or till it is too late. A thing that I know I did personally was when I was going through a pretty stressful time, I used to have a book and, everyone writes a gratitude journal or this or that. I just wrote a list of all the things I was worried about. And then I just crossed out the ones that I couldn't control.
Yeah.
And then with the ones that were there, that were left, which was like 2 or 3, I was like, what can I control tomorrow? And for me, that was my way of de-stressing, and it felt fucking great, to be honest with you. And I think that everyone can find their own practice with their work. They don't have to see the distress style of client that you see, but everyone can adopt their own way, shape or form of being able to mitigate that stress or concern.
And especially on the worrying topic that you raised, one thing that I adopt a lot of these Buddhist principles, not in any religious way, but in a secular, how do we actually put into practice way. And one of the sayings that I tell a lot of people, and then I'll explain it, is the worrying mind arises when we want things to be other than the way they are in actuality. And in English, what that really means is when we start worrying, we worry about potentials. We worry about what ifs. You can do that forever and you'll never find an answer because there will always be another what if that's where your brain, if that's where you allow it to go. And so by accepting things in actuality as they are, putting them down on your diary, writing them, seeing them in front of you, you bring to life those which require your attention because it's helpful worrying. And then you put away, or at least press away for the time being, those which you can't deal with, which is unhelpful worrying. And so there's a really big difference where we invest our emotions once we're able to do that exercise that you did, which I think is so understated in society. We don't learn to do those things. Go through your primary school years, go through your high school years, go through your tertiary years. We aren't learned to deal with our own emotions. We don't learn self-determination to be responsible for our own mental health. And yet we are now seeing epidemic proportions of mental health illnesses and distress. And it's no surprise in my view. We never learned how to deal with it.
And I guess that's the premise of this podcast in some sense, is to aid men in taking control of their life by understanding that every single person that we speak to and interview has their own unique story and they're doing their best to take onus of that. We live in such a comparative world that it's pretty hard not to compare yourself against others. And, taking onus of your life allows you to grow. And those that don't, they just keep looking at others and they just keep, basking in other people's sort of glory in some sense of the word.
Or misery.
Or misery. Yeah.
This is the thing, when you constantly compare yourself to others, or you constantly look to blame others, which again, I've been guilty of that as well. But as you progress through life and you learn different things, if I look internally, what can I change? It's very powerful. It's very hard to do. It needs that insight. It needs that pause. And that's why you ask me, what do you do after work? And your example that you gave, everyone needs that outlet. And it needs to be something that's not detrimental to your health. Okay? Having a knockoff drink I'm not talking about that. But when you start looking at other ways to either numb yourself or to avoid dealing with the realities of your situation, that's when there's that danger, that harm. And so many blokes, I've seen hundreds, and I know hundreds in my personal life, come from a big Greek, background and family. It's a difficult thing that for some reason we just don't do. And now that we are learning more about mental health and distress and challenges, it's just becoming more obvious what the solution is. And it translates across all genders and all nationalities, in my view. It's taking control of what you can. Everything else, it might be shit, might be crap one day. Let it be a crap day. But the next day you can plan for. You can deal with what you can at any given time. And anything you can't, put that in the book and say, I can't deal with those at the moment. Deal with what you can and you'll feel better.
That's so powerful. Like, that in itself is so powerful. And, growing up with what I'd say is a pretty traditional, to most extent, Indian family, the big Greek family, we just both, have the parents and the extended relatives. You had half of Athens and I had half of Bollywood always come over to our fucking place, and and everyone's saying goodbye, but they don't leave for 2 hours. And but in those conversations, you'd always see the ladies get together and talk, and the blokes, they'd have a whiskey, ouzo, and they'd just speak absolute dribble for 2, 3, 4 hours, and none of it would ever be something that you listen to as a child growing up and go, oh wow, they're talking about something that's, I guess, productive. No. It's politics, who's got a bigger,
who grew the biggest garden that year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's what I was saying earlier. That's spot on. We just weren't taught about these things. We weren't exposed to them until we experienced them, usually in the teens as children get older, but any age really. And then what are we left with? We're left with children, because they are children for the most part, who are growing up into their teens and later teens and then adult life, not learning how to deal with anxiety, not learning how to deal with what's raised. And you have parents who don't know how to deal with it either, because they too weren't taught. My grandparents, both sides of the family, were migrants from Greece. I have no doubt they had no clue how to deal with anxiety and depression and any other mental health issue, because they were worried about famine and poverty. And so it's when you look at those two just complete polar opposite lifestyles, how we have so much now. We're in an age of wealth, we're in an age of abundance, and yet we are suffering. And then you look in the past where these people who had very little, who were so happy. I was lucky enough to meet my great-grandmother who lived to 107. Her village, the people from where she was from, people from where my grandparents are from, they have so little, but their mental states and their mental health are something to just be treasured. And that's the thing that I love to see in our society, because there's no reason not to. It's so important. Our mental health, it has to be number one, because everything stems from that.
I'm keen to take a little bit of a left turn here, and you mentioned your health has not been the best, and obviously you've got some pretty strong mental health practices that you put into play. What happened and when did it start to decline? And I guess, give us an idea of how that all started.
So like you said, we did karate for how many years, and then I went into kickboxing, and then I went into jiu-jitsu, and because of that I had a stage 4 chondromalacia, the degradation of my cartilage in my knee basically. That happened in my late 20s, but then over the next couple of years, it's like nothing ever would recover. So I had a wrist fracture. Even when I had surgery and it recovered, the pain remains as though it was yesterday. I severed my Achilles accidentally with a knife. Don't ask why. But once that healed, the same thing. It feels like it happened yesterday. I blew up my tricep, massive internal bleeding in jiu-jitsu. Once that healed, the pain remained. And I've had multiple diagnoses of complex regional pain syndrome. I've had diagnoses of nociplastic pain. I've had diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which is just generalized pain throughout the body. I effectively feel pain 24/7, and that's been for a few years now. It causes chronic insomnia because you can't sleep from the pain, and if you do get to sleep, you'll get a couple of hours in, and then you wake up in pain again. And then you go to work, and I tried probably 20 plus meds before. I've been on a week-long ketamine infusion in hospital. Literally IV in your arm, ketamine through there, 24 hours a day. Go to the bathroom with it, go without it, it did nothing. And so I'm learning to live with this condition, whatever it may be. I'm not stopping. It's been about 5 years. But my health just went down the drain. I lost my fitness, lost muscle mass, and it really, I think in the last couple of months when I have taken time off work, that's when the mental side of it really caught up with me, because I didn't have the distractions of work. And most of my clients wouldn't have a clue about what I was going through. Most of the people I worked with wouldn't have a clue, because I was really good at that poker face. Again, coming back from childhood karate, that discipline, you don't show pain, you don't show that weakness. I had it and I did it, and I did a pretty good job, and I did pretty well in my work. But once I stopped to focus on my health, that's when I realized that this wasn't good. I should have dealt with this years ago, at least a couple of years ago, to say.
I know that you know my story and a little bit about dealing with pain and having cluster headaches, and I guess you're right, that sort of old school karate mentality of bit of poker face, if you punch me, I'm not going to fucking show you that I'm hurt, exactly. Especially if you get me in the midriff, because I was pretty soft in that area. But, those principles are good to some extent, because you need to have a bit of fucking prick and resilience and push through, which, I don't know whether we see as much in today's society, but at the same token, for that older generation guy, somewhere in his 30s plus, there's that element of, okay, you've taken it so far, you've wired yourself so hard, you're not even realizing what's going on, and it's like a slingshot effect. You just keep winding it up, and then one day you let it go, and then you go, holy shit, I feel it now.
It compounds.
It does, it compounds. And then, so I heard 3 years and 5 years, so it has been happening for what, five
years is basically when it started, and the last 3 years is, or maybe say 2 years, is when it really got quite intense. I mean, it's funny when I say to people, I don't know what it's like to live without pain. It's just genuinely true. And then I stop and think about that when I say it. I'm like, that's fucked.
That's really fucked.
It is. It's like right now, my whole side of my body is killing me, and that's called, what's today, Thursday? That's Thursday for me, and it'll be Friday and Saturday and Sunday. I have my better days, but none of them are pain free, no matter what medication I'm on. So the condition is very resilient to medications. I should be passed out on the floor with half the stuff I take, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to work to the effect it should. I'm about to spend another 7 days in hospital on a heavier ketamine infusion. We'll see if that does anything. If just some relief would be nice. 7 days would be fine by me if I can get 7 days out of it. But what I learned from that, though, again, is you do compare yourself to others when you have your own issues. Some of my closer clients who after their case is finished and we developed friendships and who became aware of my condition, they were constantly saying, but why don't you just stop for a bit? My response was always very similar. It's like, because I want to help people like you. And they're like, yeah, but you need to look after yourself. And I'm like, yeah, but what if I wasn't there for you? And then it goes, it's just back and forward. But they're 100% right. It goes back to the putting on that air mask concept. And so I finally came to that conclusion in the last couple of months that, hey, I was just killing myself for everyone else. Don't regret it in one sense, but it wasn't good for me at all. But that's what we do. You put on that brave face and you just get to it.
I've only ever met one other person that's got pain 24/7, and I met her through the headaches that I was getting, and she gets somewhere between a 4 to 6 out of 10 headache that's been constant for 40 years. And like for people at home that that are listening, they've got generally no idea of like what a high level of pain is, and then a sustained level of pain. And it's unrelenting. And I guess what I want to bring to everyone's attention is, you've now, over the last 3 to 5 years of having to go through all of this shit, gone pretty deep on some different types of learning, some practices. Can you give us an insight in terms of what you've tried to uncover to help yourself move through it?
Well, I'll give you the biggest one, and it's not something I tried to do at all. It's something that just happened to me. I went through a period of what's called de-personalisation, which is in the DSM-5, and it can be considered a psychiatric disorder. I thought when I woke up with it one day, everything looked different. Didn't want to look in the mirror. It was like I was looking at myself from a third person. Everything was different. And this taught me how flimsy our reality is. We know about mental health disorders like schizophrenia, when you have delusions or hallucinations. That's just an example of how flimsy reality is, depending on the person's perspective. When I woke up, I knew what reality was. So I knew straight away I hadn't lost my mind, although I was a bit concerned at first. I went and found a specialist in America and was doing Skype calls with her, and she specialized in depersonalization. And one of the comments or discussions that we had was my ability to just deal with it frankly, knowing that something wasn't right, but without the distress. And what it did to me, this is really getting to your question, is it caused a complete ego death. What I mean by that is the ego is the sense of self. Who am I? I mean, the Greek word for me is ego. And so by having that ego death, I immediately stopped all my preconceived ideas about things and people. They just melted away. Right and wrong didn't exist, because it's all about perspective. It's all about who was conditioned with what during their life versus who was conditioned with what in their life. And then these two people come together with differing views. But to say one is right or wrong, it just doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense to me when I had this ego death, because I was George beforehand. I'm still George, but my views changed. And I'd say they change in the absolute best way possible. And this is for anyone who's dealing with depersonalization. It can be quite a serious illness if it's not treated appropriately, and so people need to go and see psychs, and if the psychologists don't understand, see a psychiatrist, because it's commonly misdiagnosed, because people seem like they're crazy when they're not. They're just literally going through a period where your brain's trying to protect itself. You're just not consciously aware of it. But again, I was going to work. In fact, I probably did the best years of my work when I was going through it, because I didn't have those fixed views and beliefs. I could see things objectively, or as objectively as possible. I didn't have to focus on right and wrong. I was able to resolve cases. I was able to bring families together and actually help them move through that process without going through the court process. Or if they're already in the court process, get them out of there and finish things properly once and for all. And so that was a stepping stone for me to then build onto those mental health practices that you were talking about to deal with what I was. It was a reminder when I get into my head a little bit and I sort of forget about depersonalization, I'll slap myself and be like, no, you know full well that the way you're feeling now about someone or something, it's transient. It's not going to stay forever. And I like to remind myself there's only one certainty in the universe, and that's change. And if that's the case, I can change how I'm thinking at that point in time. If I can't, I'll work towards it. I can change. I can work towards it. And that's something I try and do every single day, because we all have our bad days. I'm not Buddha. No one special in that sense, but I have learnt, and that experience did teach me, that we do tend to look externally and blame. We don't tend to look internally and judge ourselves and really focus on what we can do.
That saying, the only certainty or the only constant in life is change, is definitely one that resonates with me, because, you know, you can't hold on to fucking things that was, because everything it's gone. Time is just, you know, and I guess one of the sort of things I want to further elaborate on is, as you've gone through this period of time, you've spoken about depersonalisation. What else has happened as a consequence from that depersonalisation? So as you've explained how it's affected your work. What else, you know, I mean, you're George around your family, you're George when you go out, you're George, you know, when you're, you know, so what else happens?
No, you know what, that's actually, I didn't think about this. I'm literally George everywhere, even in court, even with my clients. I'm very much me. I very rarely will have to put on a facade or an act, except for when you're in court and you have to be formal. That's a very different story, because you're in a courtroom with people's lives and that you have to be a lawyer.
Sure.
But outside of with my clients, I think this is probably why I get very easily attached, and my rapport with clients is pretty good, is I'm just George. I'm the George the lawyer, George the black belt, George the guitarist. I'm just George all the time. So depersonalization really assisted me to just focus on being me authentically. And that word authentic gets thrown around so much, and words like integrity and compassion, they get thrown around so much, that if people stopped and actually listened to what those words meant and understood them, they can change the world. Because when you change yourself, you change the world. It's only one at a time, but 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, and compounding, we know how quickly that goes up. So it really changed everything in my life in terms of relationships. And I wish it happened earlier in life, because there was, prior to it happening, I had my anxieties with relationships, my insecurities in relationships, things that were absolutely detrimental, things that I regretted at the time because I wasn't as aware of them as I should have been. Again, it's that insight I didn't have, because my ego at the time didn't allow for it, because I was so conditioned to my life and my way of thinking. That ego death broke it down for me. Once those really severe symptoms subsided and I could actually take away from it the benefits, everything else became very clear. There is no right and wrong. I don't have to treat X person this way because I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what their background is. I don't know what their conditioning is. And so by doing that, you're accepting people at face value, and you're genuinely trying to get to know them, and you're genuinely making an effort to just be present, be your authentic self, because you should have nothing to hide. And if you do have something to hide, work it out with yourself. What is it within you that you don't like? What is it within you that you think may actually not be helpful towards those people you love? Because we all treat people who are close to us and who we love with occasionally in ways that aren't favourable. That's part of being human, but the other part is learning from it. And so it really, to me, is about, if you make a mistake or a fuck up, you learn from it. That's life. Life is it's an ending, but it's an ever-long learning period or learning process. It's up to you whether you choose to treat it that way or not, or just repeat the same mistakes. See which one works for you.
Yeah, the definition of insanity, you know, expect a different result and do the same thing over and over again.
Exactly right.
How has this affected your thoughts? Like, you know, I know how you look on the outside, like you're a steely bloke, but what goes through between your ears? Because one of the big things for us blokes is we get these thoughts. We know that our thoughts are not us. And I know that you have gone through that level of self-inquiry to know that, you know, you're not your thoughts. But those people that have practiced meditation, that have practiced a bit of quiet time, all of a sudden their thoughts quiet down. For someone that's in pain all the time, do you ever have moments where your thoughts are quiet?
only when I really am into playing acoustic guitar. And that really into that. Because I used to play for 2 to 3 hours a night. Now, because of my
Wrist.
my wrist and the additional pain issues, and I've got radial tunnel syndrome they just found, which is an impingement on the radial nerve, which goes down the whole bloody arm. So at least that's something physical that I know is wrong I can fix. But my brain's pretty hyperactive, I think, but I say very little. So this is a podcast. I've said more now than I would in the last week.
Yeah.
You know, at home I get compared to my late grandfather George, who I got his name and some of his mannerisms from, where we're the philosophers. We sort of just sit there and listen and don't speak as much. Whereas my other grandfather, who was absolutely my hero, he was very much bringing everyone together, loud laughter, you know, wanting to talk to people. I didn't really get that side of him, but I got something else from him. I actually have a tattoo that goes from my ankle to my shoulder. That's a memorial piece from him for him. But it really is just my brain can be on 100 miles an hour, and then I can play my guitar and it stops. But in terms of what I think about on a daily basis or whatever, it's really about controlling my feelings when it comes to pain. It's really about controlling, again, like what you said before, is it's just really spot on. What can I control right now? I can worry about it. Is it helpful worrying or unhelpful? If it's unhelpful, I'm going to stop. Sometimes I have to slap myself, you know, metaphorically, sometimes physically. You know, it might be going to the gym, doing what I can, getting it out of your system. It's there's no easy way to deal with it. Life is difficult for everyone in their own different ways. Some people have it better, some people have it worse, but we're all in it together and we all have to get through it. And so when I'm at home, I might just be sitting on my bed and I really can't move and my brain's just like, God, why me sort of thing. I think, well, why not you? It wasn't a choice. Didn't do anything wrong. Could be you. There's 1,000 other people with it as well. And then there's another 1,000,000 people with something else 10 times worse. I don't try and compare pain because it's so subjective. Like you said, there's a very difference between something acute and short and sharp and something that stays there and repeats for either hours or days or weeks on end with cluster headaches or whatever it might be. And I did research on that, and I feel for you so much because of it, because I didn't realize how bad it really, really is. But the same thing goes for you. You're here, you're running this podcast, you run a successful business, you're doing what you can, you bring messages to people with the podcast. These are the things that you are an example of, the very thing that I'm saying I try and do. And these are things that other people can do themselves. You don't have to be in pain as a bloke to appreciate the times when you're not in pain. But what you can do is, was it a good day for me? Did something happen that was bad? What was it? What could I have done better? Just those daily sort of thoughts. That's all you really have to do on a day-to-day basis to get through it. And like I said earlier, if it's a shit day, let it be a shit day.
I've got 2 questions that are like banging out of my brain right now. One is around pain and testosterone. And, you know, I want to get onto that in a second, because I feel like every bloke that I go to the gym with is all speaking about, you know, getting the test higher and all this type of jazz. But what role does hope play for you? Because to have an idea that your pain is there, you've had it for a long period of time, where does hope fit in? Because is it something that you entitle yourself to? Is it something that you feel deprives you of, you know, some way, shape or form around reality? Like what's your thought process on hope?
I always tell myself, and I tell my clients and everyone around me, hope is always a good thing. Always. There's a difference between hope and optimism and hope and pessimism. And a lot of this goes, and again, this goes into a lot of the Buddhist sort of teachings about attachment theory. But when you attach yourself to an outcome, let's say, like my mum keeps trying to do, because mums do what mums do and they try and be positive. No, you'll be better next year. My response is always, I might be worse next year. And to me, that it's equally valid. And I feel no worse or less by saying it. She goes, no, don't think like that. I said, but I could be worse next year. But if I attach an expectation that I will be better and then I'm not, the only person who will suffer is me, because I've attached an expectation to a positive outcome that may not eventuate. Hope, on the other hand, is enduring. Hope doesn't run out. Even at the worst of worst times, if you're still alive, you can still have hope, no matter how bad something looks. The tragedy that we saw recently with the submersible, even on the fourth day, people were holding out hope. No one was positive. No one was optimistic. But they maintained hope until the very end, and then reality set in. That's really where hope fits within me. I always have hope. Hope drives me. Hope, it's enduring. But I do not confuse hope with optimism, and I don't attach myself to expectations when they may not eventuate. Be good. It'd be awesome if the pain stopped or whatever. I wouldn't complain. But it's not something that has any place in my day-to-day life. Hope does always, not optimism. I'm generally a positive guy, but in this sense of dealing with the pain, hope is you need it. Otherwise, you'll just sit there and you've got you'll believe you have no hope. No hope to me is the end of the road. If someone sits and they truly believe they have no hope, I feel for them deeply, because there is always hope if you're still here. And I've had that hard conversation with clients, and I've lost clients as well. Hope, you need it. Optimism, and I manage clients' expectations to the point where they probably think, Jesus, that's pretty brutal sort of thing. And then at the end of it, you know what, you were right. The last year and a half was absolute fucking hell. But you told me, stay hopeful, don't be optimistic, we'll get through it together. Always do. Always do.
It's interesting with my line of work, treating patients that are predominantly runners or cyclists or football players, a lot of them that, have serious sporting injuries that might affect their careers. Being able to provide hope, but also give the blunt reality of where things are right now and where you hope they need to be, is a hard one to do, because I've had people that have come in that have been told, you can't. And it fucking shatters them. And so if your internal dialogue is you can't, it's going to shatter you. And if your internal dialogue is you can, well, that might be slightly optimistic, but it definitely is a bias that you'd rather have than you can't.
It reignites hope.
Correct, it reignites hope. One of the other things that, alongside hope is language, and the language you use with yourself to sort of go forward on that. You used the framing before, I heard you say, my condition. Do you take onus of that condition, or is it a condition that's happening to you, and do you try to separate yourself from it?
Oh, I don't separate myself from it at all. It is my condition. Absolutely, it is mine. It's what I'm dealing with. I mean, it'd be good to get an idea of exactly what it is, but because it's such a complex condition, it's hard to put names to it exactly, but it is my condition. It's part of who I am. I don't shy away from it. I don't shy away from anything that's part of who I am, the positives of me and the negatives of me. It is who I am, and I'll try and work to better it at any opportunity I get.
Do you think giving it an entity, though, limits you? And the only reason I'm saying it respectfully is because I have people that say, and this is something that I had with my headaches, I was saying, these are my headaches. And I was like, they're not my fucking headaches. Oh. It's a headache that I'm experiencing. Oh, yeah. And I try to remove that condition from me and go, that condition is currently affecting me, but it's its own thing. It's not mine. I don't want it to be part of me.
I don't personify it. It's not a person. It's not an entity. It's mine in the sense of it's something that I experience. It's an experience of mine. That's all it is. It's a sensation. It's pain. So it's like when I'm happy. I feel happiness. It's my happiness. It's no different to me. Pain is pain. Happy is happy. Sad is sad. They're just experiences of life. And this is the other thing. Life is experiential. We only learn through experiences. So when I say it's my pain, that's just the words I'm using. I don't think twice about any depth behind it. It's a condition I have, I could say, and it's a condition I'm dealing with. I don't give it life, and I don't give it strength by saying it's mine and I have to fight it, because it's my body that's doing it to itself. This is the thing. I'm speaking, but it's the brain doing all the work. It's the brain causing the pain. You know, these are the things that are outside of my control. Because of that, I don't worry about them. I plan, I do what I can.
How far into your childhood have you gone, you know, when you talk about Buddhist teachings and you talk about, you know, psychological interventions, a lot of that comes down to, you know, the way that you're raised, you were born, things that you hold on to. I know for myself, I had a lot of guilt and shame growing up, just, you know, and it wasn't through up until doing some pretty interesting shit where I started to look inwards, especially at my childhood. Were there things, I guess, with your childhood that you look back and go, that could be a contributing factor into why this is not resolving?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, number one, you look genetically too. Mum has fibromyalgia and her dad had some pain issues too. But that aside, as a child, I was a middle child, older brother, younger brother. So I obviously have middle child syndrome.
You were the best middle child I ever met, mate.
Yeah, if it exists. But I was socially anxious. Although I had friends, I was constantly questioning the world around me. Again, no one was there to teach you otherwise. But I had an extremely supportive family in the sense that they were always there. Doesn't mean they always knew how to say the right thing at the right time. And again, we weren't taught these things. But I grew up with my parents who both listened to punk music. Now, the reason why that's actually really important is punk, as I grew up and as I was taught about, it's between the ears. It's not what you look like. It's not anything else. It's about acknowledging things. It's about moving forward as a unified society. That's what the punk ethos is about. It's not about earrings and mohawks and violence and anarchy, although there are different subcultures and branches, but that's not where I came from. So I learned from a young age to be anti-fascist, anti-racist, pro welcoming people from any background that you're from. I was actively involved in sociological teachings because of who my father was, political systems, understanding the basis as to why capitalism can be dangerous and communism can be pro, and that socialism can help everyone, and the differences between the two. And now we're seeing really capitalism eat itself when we look around the world and how far it's progressed. But getting back to it, that was my upbringing. I'm listening to punk music and quite some heavy music, or even metal or horror punk and things that would...
Horror punk?
Horror punk. You know, we're talking about people who they have those looks. They look like dead people, like the Misfits or whatever it might be. But that was my childhood. That was normal to me. And what it did, I think, is it made everything else that I saw in society pretty bland. It's like, oh yeah, this is pretty bland, whatever, 'cause that's my home. You look like the Addams Family house, sort of thing. That's who we were. And so when I went to school, then it's, oh geez, like I'm different. I really was. We all were. Now I love it. It's one of the best things. I'm glad I was the way I was. But absolutely, I had my anxieties as a child that I only really recognized as an adult. And even the example that you gave, I don't know if I've told you this or if I've told your brother, but at karate, although I had the poker face and that, stern sort of look and attention when fighting, I hated when I was sparring against you and Michael. You guys were good. I got hit in the face. You guys were really bloody good, and I struggled with that. But for some reason, there was always part of me that wanted it. And then afterwards, playing knuckles until bleeding and bruising and just complete crazy pain, there was part of me that wanted it. And you were the two only ones that I really wanted to spar, because although I was anxious about it and it was a challenge, it was something that it's like I had a drive. And you guys gave me that opportunity to grow and face that. I wouldn't call it a fear because I wasn't fearful of you, but it's like, oh, it's these guys again, Oh, yeah, Michael, he's always has that stance. He's really quick. Watch out for that. Steve, he's tall. He can do head kicks, It was running through my mind, but you wouldn't. I ask you, you probably wouldn't have had a clue.
Would never have had a clue.
Would never have had a clue, but that's what every single time we sparred, and then wasn't when we stopped and go all our separate ways, it was no different to that in kickboxing or that in jiu-jitsu, no different to that in the law. When I'd go to court, I'd be freaking out half the time. And then I'd speak and I'd be eloquent and fluent, I'd get a good result. But it didn't change, but it was really that acknowledgement that these anxieties that we have, and you said it earlier as well, the way we think of ourselves isn't who we are. It's that process that we need to remind ourselves of. These feelings I'm having right this second, why? Break it down. Because when you're a child, you can't. But with our memory, we can go back and say, why was I anxious as the child? Or why in the 5th grade did I lie to the teacher about X, Y, Z? I don't have an example there, but that thing. Or why in high school was I an outlier? I mean, my best mate is your cousin. I had very few other really close mates throughout my high school years, although I had friends, but I didn't click with everyone. I clicked with more than anyone until this day, even though he lives now internationally. So as an adult looking back, I had all very similar experiences that a lot of children had, whether it be self-doubt, anxiety, unsure about where you stand in the world, where you're going to be. I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I sucked at maths and science. So it just turned into a passion instead, which is great. I love it now. I can name you every fish in the bloody ocean, if you want, and breeding times and places of that, and go into the real nerd side of nature. But I didn't have the brain to do it in terms of a career, and that's fine. I found another spot that I was enjoyed, or at least good at. So I don't know if that answers the question, but...
Well, I guess, is there any one of those specific things or emotions or times where you go, yeah, that trait really is something that still holds deep within me that I need to resolve, and that may be a contributing factor to why this condition has been lingering around for so fucking long?
There could be a psychosomatic aspect to my condition. Fibromyalgia, for example, can induce from stress. So there definitely can be that psychosomatic, and the time I'm taking off now is after a very stressful period too, which is pretty normal in some ways, but I was taking on probably too much. I don't think there's any one thing. A lot of the things that I experienced in life that I had to deal with was self-doubt. People were telling me, oh, you're talented, because I could play all this stuff on guitar. But they didn't see I've been playing for 20 years and practicing hours every night. Or people say, oh, you're a really good fisherman or whatever it is, because I know that sounds funny, but there's a whole nother culture out there when it comes to fishers and lures and blah, 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 and kayaking and exploring. But they didn't see the hours and hours and weekends that I did, or, oh, you're really good at, this aspect of law. It's like, yeah, but they didn't see the last 10 years of it. That self-doubt is always there, and I think that actually is what drives me to be the best I can at things. But it's still there. Like, people will see me if I'm shredding on a guitar. They'll be like, oh, you're amazing. And I'm thinking I'm shit. It's genuinely there, that self-doubt. But I try and think again, laterally, what's the point in thinking about it that way? What benefit does self-doubt have? Well, I'll use the one benefit it can have. Let it drive me. Let it push me forward. Because I'm the only person who's going to change that. Because I'm hearing other people around me telling me I'm talented or whatever it might be. I'm not. I just pushed myself. I sucked at guitar. I remember cutting strings so I didn't have to go to lessons. I ended up teaching myself. And that's really when I really progressed. But self-doubt has always been something in my life. Always.
It's something that, I've definitely dealt with starting this podcast. It's been a year up until the day where I've actually done this episode. And it's been, whether it's procrastination or there's been a few fuck-ups or there's been a couple of events that have occurred, and you go, geez, is this really for me? Like, am I really going to do this? Am I good enough to do this? Is this going to be a 1 episode? Is this going to be a 10 episode podcast? Can I do 1,000 episodes? Like what the go is. And it's so applicable. And I guess when you look back earlier on in your, you know, your preteen years, a lot of that doubt, you had to either A, crush yourself, or B, your parents would just tell you you've got to believe, or what you won't achieve, or whatever the saying was back in the day. Sport was a big part of your life, and I know that, and martial arts, and probably Dragon Ball Z, and of course, 100%. We can go. That's a different conversation. That's when you were talking before about, you know, embracing the challenge of fighting. Yeah. Mate, every fucking time we would, like, our pre-workout as children was watching Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, exactly.
It was literally watching Dragon Ball Z.
I literally dyed my hair yellow one summer just to go Super Saiyan, but it didn't work.
I
was actually blonde, like full dead set.
Dude, you could do with one of those sensu bean things right now, probably just a bit of healing power.
There's a funny story about that though, that the first day, and I went to a private school, the first day of the year I went back with blonde hair, and the principal goes, here, you know, we encourage individuality. Take George for example, in the middle of the first school assembly, and then after it, he goes up to me, he goes, if you haven't dyed that back to your normal colour by tomorrow, don't come back to school.
You're fucking joking.
No, so in the presence of everyone else, he used me as a positive example, but then when it was one-on-one, he was showing me that it was the wrong thing to do and dye your hair back. And I was just like, wow.
How old were you?
I was, 14?
Shit.
14, 15, yeah. It was a really... I laugh so much about it. I'm like, what an interesting thing to do, to tell the whole school how we promote individuality, and yet that one example that you've just used, you've told them to become like everyone else. It was... I'll never forget it, and I've told that to... You know, everyone, when my folks found out, they were furious, being the punks that they are, and you know that. But anyway... Yeah.
Individuality. I still haven't forgotten that pain and testosterone question, because I know it's in the back of my mind. I want to ask you, but individuality is something that not a lot of people take onus of. Especially as blokes, we like to just be able to, you know, not cause generally too much drama, or it's only going to be drama if we know exactly how the outcome's going to be.
Oh, but it was like when I was saying before about that self-doubt and stuff, I wasn't getting the support I probably needed because I wasn't telling people. And again, it goes back to we're not taught from a young age to tell these people, saying these slogans, it's okay not to be okay. Like, I can't stand them. It's not actually promoting wellness. It's not actually giving people the opportunity and the facilities to actually deal with what they're thinking and these thoughts that they have. You have schools with counsellors in there who are overworked or underskilled or whatever it might be, who are pulling their hair out. And I know this full well because we deal with them as part of work. And they're not equipped to deal with what these children are going through, especially in the digital age. And so you have children who don't have that outlet, although they're dealing with these thoughts on their own, and it comes out in the worst ways. These are the children that are growing up with developmental issues. These are the children who are growing up with body dysmorphia. These are the children who are growing up with depression and anxiety and anything else you can think of. Can't you blame just the parents? Parents are working.
What do you tell parents, though, that come into you at family law? Because I know part of what you do is not only try to resolve the matter, but you give a lot of advice when it comes to how to handle things at home. You know, how do you get them to broach the gap between them and their children? If they're working all the time, they come home, they ask their child, how are you? And the child goes, good.
Yeah.
Standard.
Yep. Absolutely.
How do you get deeper with your kids, or what have you found that parents have implemented that have allowed them to go and get in a little bit deeper?
I'm pretty brutal, to be honest, when it comes to that with parents, especially men. Because men are usually the ones who have to hear it. When I think it's different when you're a woman and you've given birth to the child. You got a lot more at stake there, physically as well. There's complications that can arise, and there's a lot of risk there. But with men who are typically the breadwinners, because women are typically the ones who are staying home looking after the children, especially in the juvenile years, I have a pretty brutal stance when it comes to men and going home and not being there for the children, whatever it might be. And it's, what do you want to prioritize? And I ask them. They say my children. Okay, how do you prioritize it? Well, my kid finishes work at 3:30, but I can't get off at 3:30 to be at home by 4 to see them. So have you spoken to your boss? No. All right, well, what have you done? Nothing. Okay, so you've thought about it though. Yeah, I've thought about it. Okay. Isn't it your priority? Yeah. When you have a priority, do you just think about it or do you do something? You do something. It changes their whole perspective. Once they realize what their priority is, and it doesn't mean that they don't have multiple, and this is what we talk about. Men, they juggle so many things. It's easy to just complain and say, yeah, you're working, you're coming home, and you don't do the dishes, and you don't do that. But they in themselves are saying, I need to support my family. If they don't have food on the table or a roof over their head, my wife's going to leave me, I can't support much. It's not as easy as that. But in terms of the prioritizing, once you prioritize something, you put things in place to ensure that it happens as best as possible. But again, it goes back to actuality. You can only deal with things as you can. Some men, with the jobs that they have, they cannot be home at a certain time before their kids go to bed. Some men will not even have weekend time. Those are the choices that these people make, but they're also in the minority. The majority of people are the 9 to 5 workers. They have time to see their family, and it can be small things. They're reading them a good night story at bed, asking how the day went, taking a day off of annual leave to just do a special thing that they've seen. It's about doing what you can, not what you can't. And it's once you just put that perspective of what is your priority, these people generally, they self-regulate. They will go and do certain things to assist themselves and put things into priority, and they plan accordingly. And if they can't, or if they're having troubles, they ask me about it. And the way it ties into family law is, it shows how involved these people are, and that they just didn't know how to get involved in a way that shows that, of course, they love their children. They worked their hands to the bone just to look after their children. But then they get criticised for not being at parent-teacher interviews. Or then they get criticised because they weren't able to, help their child with their homework. Meanwhile, they're tearing their hair out working to feed this family and support them. So it really is about a matter of perspective. And all I do is I give them that perspective. I can't tell them how to be because it's not what I want for them. They need to walk away once my engagement is over. If we're friends, awesome. If they hate me, so be it. But if they can walk away with that ability to reflect, get their own insight, prioritize their lives, that's the best that you can do for someone else in my position. I can coach people, I can tell them exactly what to do, but that's not authentic. That's just them hearing it from someone else. So, I don't know if
it's like that idea, you can't change someone, they can only change themselves.
I'll give you the building blocks.
Yeah.
I'll support you. I wasn't joking when I said before as well, sometimes, after our calls, almost all of my clients have my mobile number. I've told them, anytime you're in distress, you call me.
Fuck, I don't know a lawyer that's got that level of relationship.
After the first call, I'll rarely get another one because they realize the thing that they're in distress about wasn't worth the emotional damage it was doing to them. They just didn't know how to deal with it. There's other cases where I've had 3 a.m. calls from cat teams where my clients are gone off the rails or whatever it might be. It's like really serious things, and then I'm glad that they had my number. But it's about that support network, that showing these people, showing it. I have blokes call me, George, you don't get it. She's gone and done this again. I was like, all right, but what can we do about it right this second? Well, nothing. I'm like, don't get angry. Save those emotions. Let's deal with it tomorrow together. I don't get another call. I'll get a text maybe the next day, or George, this thing happened again, but it's all right, I've done this now. You just give people building blocks, and I'm learning myself. I don't have it right every time either. But because I've seen it so often with so many people, it's a pretty simple equation. Plan, prioritize, put it into action, do your best in the circumstances, and the rest is life.
There was something I heard someone else say, that if you have an emotion, hold it for 90 seconds and that peak emotion will change.
Yeah.
And it's that time where you don't react to your emotion. You just let it sit. You sit with it, for that period of time. I'm going to get onto that question now.
Yeah.
I know that through our conversations outside of this that you've had, some pretty low test results, and it's something that, was it the doctors weren't testing, or there was something going on, I don't know, but they weren't compliant with it, and then it just dropped off a grid.
Yeah.
What have you learnt about testosterone for us men and for your current pain and problem?
Well, two things. One, don't trust doctors simply because they're doctors. Number one, you have to find someone that is willing to invest in you, not simply because they have a degree on the wall. The same thing about lawyers like I am. Don't trust me just because I'm a lawyer. Let's have a chat first. Let's see if I'm willing to invest in you like you're willing to invest in me, financially, emotionally, and all the other ways. Same thing with your practice. The first one I saw as an endocrinologist was just when I started having low T symptoms and life was really getting down on me. And I gave him the results, and it was low, but it was in the reference range.
So what's the reference range?
So the reference range was 250 nanograms per deciliter to 750 nanograms per deciliter. If your free testosterone was within that range, they say you're within the range and you're okay. And mine was about 400. So I was at the low end of the range, but within this reference range. And this endocrinologist immediately said, "You're fine." And I said, "Well, I'm not fine. I've got all these symptoms that I didn't have. These results that you're seeing could actually just be a worsening stage of the process. Should I get another test? Should I do something?" And he goes, "No, I wouldn't do any more tests. I wouldn't even make another appointment with me." He was dismissive of me because, according to him, my levels were within a reference range, which is only a bell curve. It's only about what the majority of people will sit within. And then I continued to regress. I got worse and worse and worse, where I could barely get out of bed in the morning, chronic fatigue, just incredibly exhausted all the time. I had nothing. And then I saw another endocrinologist. I did another blood test, and my testosterone was 87. So I went from 400 with the cutoff being that 250 to 300. I was at 87.
Oh
I was
my
in double
God.
digits, which is the equivalent of that of an 80-year-old. I was furious.
Fuck, you would have been...
I was furious. I wanted to go to that guy's place and just grab a chair, and I won't say anything else.
You would have fucking throw a chair through his window and plus some.
I just felt like going back to him and showing those new results and just put it in a letter to him and just say, treat the patient, not the reference range. But anyway, I just moved on from that and just focused on getting better. So then got put on testosterone replacement therapy. Had a few issues at the start, getting the dosage right, making sure that there was no side effects, which there were. Again, more medications to combat those. But then eventually, now it's been months and months, and I'm in a much better place than what I was from those low T symptoms. We're going to have our next blood test coming up in a couple of months to see how else I'm going. But it's improved significantly. It's not quite Wolverine-like a recovery about anything, but I'm recovering better because I haven't trained for so long because of my health issues. And I thought, geez, not this again. I'm going to I'll do a bicep curl and tear my bicep off. That didn't happen. But it just sort of brought me back to normality. I'm not hyper anything, I'm still George, and I'm probably where I was. But I'm still on it. We'll see how long I'm on it for. Because we can't just stop it either way. But if there's anything particular you want to know about it, I'm happy to answer.
Well, it's just there's a lot of blokes in their 30s that are my age that speak about TRT. And, some of them don't understand that, they'll affect their potential for kids. Some of it's, you have to look into that. Others want to, look at ways and they can get bigger in the gym, or potentially they feel, they've been with a partner, they've had a baby, the partner's had a baby, had a friend that all of a sudden his testosterone dropped as well. And one of the things that I think would be really good to know from you is, although you've been in pain, what was the key symptom that you felt that you've gone, yeah, my test is low, I need to get this looked into?
Well, look, I didn't know because I didn't know what was wrong with it. It was only until the blood test showed up. But it was just, again, that chronic fatigue, no libido, no real drive, no wanting to get out of bed, weakness, which is different to soreness and muscle problems. And because with fibromyalgia and this type of neuropathic or nociplastic pains, they're different. Like I've got like a huge cut here, and the other day I stabbed myself with glass and bled everywhere accidentally. But I was like, oh, whatever. Those pains I can deal with. But when it came to the testosterone and the symptoms, it was really just a whole culmination of symptoms. I was like, okay, I'll just do a blood test. And then it was like, okay, I'm on the lower end. And then I went through that process. But just really getting back to what you said, and really none of the endocrinologists really explained this to me because I'd already done the research, but it shuts off your natural production. When you use exogenous testosterone, especially at high levels, it tells your body and your testes you don't need to produce anymore. And so it shuts it off. And you have a lot of bodybuilders who'll go on cycles, come off it, go on TRT just to get back to their normal levels. And so when we see blokes in there, and it's not just in 30s or 40s and 50s where more people need it, unfortunately we're seeing it in teenagers, we're seeing it in 20-year-olds where they think that they need to be on testosterone to achieve these physiques that they're seeing online with these influencers that are simply unattainable.
And most of these influencers are on the fucking gear.
They're all in gear. There was one who died a few days ago who had an amazing physique, good bloke, and he died from an aneurysm. And he had just stopped his gear to go onto TRT just to replace his normal levels. And so when I was in my 400s, my levels of test, that to me would have been fine if there wasn't the symptoms, because I would never risk losing my natural ability to produce it, because then getting it back takes months and months and months, and some people years. It depends how long you're on it for. You're on test replacement therapy for years and years and years, your body's ability to bounce back from that struggles, because it all relates to it's called luteinizing hormone. I think it's released from the pituitary gland, and that goes down your testes, tells it to produce testosterone. That all shuts off, all of it. Then you got things like gynecomastia that can start, which is what I started developing. I had to take pills not to stop that extra breast tissue from growing, which it has. Hot flashes at night, making sure that the aromatase, because as you take testosterone, it converts into estradiol, which converts into estrogen. There's mood swings that can accompany that. There's a lot of mental health issues that can accompany that. And so for what I tell any blokes out there, 20s, 30s, doesn't matter, do blood work, check what your levels are, follow your GP's advice, get specialist advice, and do what's best for you. But if it's to get jacked for the sake of getting jacked, that might be what you want to do. But do your research. Make an informed decision.
I've got 2 more questions for you. The first one is, what does George hope for over the next year?
So George has ridden off the next year completely to focus on himself.
Nice.
If I can get back to a more functional person where I can go back to playing guitar, maybe not 2 or 3 hours a night, but maybe an hour a night. Go back to going for a run without breaking down after 100 meters, going to the gym and not, breaking down and having to rest for 2 weeks after that, or, just even getting a good night's sleep. If I can have a week of sleep, for example, that's a success for me. So the next year is really about focusing on putting on my oxygen mask, focusing on me, and getting myself back to a stage where I can help other people as well, because it's a passion of mine. Like, I love it. It's tough, but I love helping others, but I'm just not in a state to do it right now. At least not to the extent I was. I still take calls now and then, to help people, because that's how I am. But next year is really just get back on the horse and just trying to be me again. Get back to where I was.
The final thing that I wanted to ask you was, at the start of this podcast, we spoke about how you hope that this conversation might inspire the men that are listening. What are the key things that, you know, after speaking for the last hour and a half, you hope that some of the guys listening have taken away from this?
Listen to your internal voice in your head. Look at the people around you and see how they respond to you. Is it that everyone's wrong, or is it that it's something that you're doing that you could improve on? If there's things that you're not happy about, work out what they are. Go get professional advice if you need it. Go to multiple people. I've seen multiple psychologists throughout my life, the majority of which were completely underskilled and just were not able to assist me until I found people who did. And those small changes can just make a huge difference. And so if you're struggling, you don't even have to be struggling, if you want to improve, have the integrity to look within, get that insight, be the person you want to be, and start making those changes today. I say this to my old man when I tell him he needs to look after himself a bit more in his later years. Tomorrow never comes. It is always today. We always wake up today. We don't wake up tomorrow. That's today. Every day, do what you can. You can plan for tomorrow. That's fine. You can have hope for tomorrow. Completely fine. But if the biggest takeaways for me is whatever you're dealing with, whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship, whether you have children, listen to the internal voice. If something's not going right, you're concerned about something, you have anxiety about something, or you're depressed, deal with it. Find the people who are willing to invest in you. It's not easy to find them. I'm 5 years into this journey and I found maybe 1 or 2 doctors after seeing 20 plus specialists who I can finally say, these people have my interest. Last 5 years were hell in terms of pain and just not getting relief. But you push through, you find those people, because that internal voice in my head, something's not right. Keep pushing, keep finding out more about yourself, and ask people around you, hey, this is what I was thinking about myself, or this issue, what do you think? If you don't have that support person, try and find them. Expose yourself to things that you're uncomfortable with. If you're pretty antisocial, and I am in a lot of ways, I'm a bit of a hermit, but sometimes you got to push yourself out there and go on podcasts like these that I never thought I'd be doing. But here I am, and it's something that I know that I won't regret, because it's something that here I am. I chose to do it. That's what I'd love people to take away. Think about it, get insight, look within, and don't be, and you mentioned this, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but that reactivity to emotions can be your best friend, or they can be your worst friend. Because those 90 seconds when you're holding on could be the difference between you punching a hole in the wall and putting your hand in your pocket and just saying, it's not worth it. And, you know, I hate to use that example, but I've had a lot of punched holes in walls through my job in terms of what I've seen, and it could have been avoided if you had that 90-second exercise. So find what works for you, get the help you need if you need it, and just otherwise, integrity and compassion. Look out for those around you. Be honest to yourself. That's about it, really, without going on a soapbox too much.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
It's really insightful. I've always known George as the friend, and George as the martial artist, but not George the lawyer, or George is the bloke that's gone through a shitload of pain and working through that. And I've already learnt a lot about how you've dealt with things, and I'm hoping that whoever's listened has too. So thanks for joining us on this podcast. It means a lot, and I'm sure that for those that have listened, it's meant a lot for them to hear out this podcast. So thanks, mate.
Keep squeezing those plums.
Fucking oath. Cheers, brother. Cheers.